Kevin McLernan, CBP commissioner, said this.
2 weeks ago, I briefed the media and testified in Congress that our immigration system was at the breaking point. That breaking point has arrived this week at our border. CBP is facing an unprecedented humanitarian and border security crisis all along our southwest border, and nowhere has that crisis manifested more acutely than here in El Paso. On Monday and Tuesday, CBP started the day with over 12,000 migrants in our custody. As of this morning, that number was 13,400. A high number for us is 4,000. A crisis level is 6,000.
Joining us now is Pat Buchanan. We remember what Beto O'Rourke said just a few weeks ago, that the walls in El Paso, where that Border Patrol chief was speaking, he wanted those current walls torn down. Pat Buchanan's with us now. Pat, great to have you on.
Good to talk to you, Laura.
So, Pat, why does sovereignty matter? People hear the word sovereignty, and I thought it was important on this show today to explain what we mean when we say sovereignty, our sovereign right to be a country, to be a free country with laws and so forth. Why is that important?
Well, it defines us as a nation. Our sovereignty, our protects our national independence, defines our national independence. Our borders define where America begins and where America ends. The borders define whom we're going to adopt and bring into the American family. But what is happening here, quite simply, is it's even during the Trump era.
Terrible.
That the borders of the United States are basically collapsing. And if you got, tens of thousands, you got, what was it, in February, we had something like 76,000 arrested or apprehended at the border, and they're being held, and now they're opening up the pens where these folks are being held, and they're coming into the country. After a while, we cease to be the America we grew up in, and we simply become sort of what TR called a polyglot empire. And in this day and age, empires are in trouble because of the nationalism and tribalism of peoples and ethnic identity of peoples. And it's hard for me to see down the road, if you project a decade or two, exactly what holds America together as a nation. We're going to have no common language. Our history divides us. We have no common heroes. Some are denounced, people that built the nation, while others are praised who are on the opposite sides. So it just seems to me the whole idea of America as one nation and one people is disappearing before our eyes.
It is, and I am really, and they say the border's at the breaking point. Well, sometimes I wake up and I feel like I'm at the breaking point, because here we elected Donald Trump. It was about building the wall, enforcing the border, deporting all the violent criminals, law and order, safety, security. And instead what we have, and this is, I blame the Republicans too for those first 2 years. In March, the inflow of illegals coming into our country, 15,000 parents, so-called parents, and 40,000 children. Those are entire U.S. small cities and towns. Will ask for asylum. Will ask for asylum.
Yeah, this message that the Border Patrolman has given out, and what the front pages are giving out, that folks are being brought in, they're being held for a while, now they're being released into the population. That message goes out to Central and South America and the world. And, you come to the United States and you are automatically better off than you are in 9 out of 10 countries in the world. Why not decide that your future and your family's future is in the United States? And why not come here? And what's to prevent the basic overrunning of the nation?
So the sovereignty that our founding fathers understood was critical for the survival of the republic was rooted in the idea of keeping us free, which I think we forget about. To be a truly free people, a foreign power, in this case many countries, can't control us. And right now, even though we have a booming economy, other countries really are, in a way, controlling us. because of our lack of will to enforce our border and to do what Eisenhower understood you had to do. And Sweden is deporting tens of thousands of people. Sweden is finding itself in a real mess with the refugee crisis and so forth. So,
Sweden was a purely homogenous country and had never, I think, entertained invasions of any kind or mass migrations coming into the country. And Europe had not. That's why you see Europe so horribly convulsed. Now, America has handled large migrations, but mainly they came from the West. They came from Western civilization, and they came first from Northern Europe and the British Isles. Then they came from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they were assimilated. And the point is, the great melting pot that assimilated all those migrants that resulted from the timeout on immigration that began in 1925 and continued to the 1960s. That gave the country time so that all these people became, if you will, Americanized. That process is dead now. It's not taking place. You've got half the population of Los Angeles County, as I understand it, doesn't speak English as a first language. I mean, if we can't even understand each other and talk to each other, communicate each other, and don't even agree on whether our history is good and all the things that united us, again, what makes us one country and one people? I do think this, Laura, I think all the things we're talking about and arguing about, whether 200 troops in Syria and whether we're going to come home from Afghanistan, I think people are going to look back decades from now and say, what were these people thinking? That these concerns are far greater than what is happening on their own southern border, which is wide open.
Well, again, Pat wrote books about this. I wrote chapters of books about this. If America is worth preserving, we have to be able to do what's required to preserve it. I mean, preserving her requires sacrifice. It also requires that there is a uniform application of U.S. law across the board that is unmistakably clear. And that means law and order at the entry point into our country. Without that, why should the kid in the inner city live up to the rule of law? Well, I mean, really?
It's not only that. But there's a significant slice of America's elite. It's with tremendous influence over the culture and over politics in terms of what people think, who basically think that what is happening is that a good country is in the near future when all these folks are here, and the evil old America is increasingly further and further behind us. I mean, people don't even agree on what is a good country anymore. And in terms of values and views, I mean, the disagreements are far more profound than they were, in the area when Joe McCarthy was hammering Harry Truman, which I still recall. I mean, those disagreements, they were vicious, et cetera, but there was general agreement on what America was.
And now the word assimilation is considered hateful on college campuses. To say assimilate or speak English. If you tell someone in a restaurant, can you speak English, please?
Yeah,
you'll be thrown out.
There's another point: is the West a good civilization? Was the West a good civilization?
No, they hate the West. West is not best.
Was there colonialism? Was a policy of basically spreading Western civilization into the two Americas? And it was a very violent enterprise at times, and the indigenous people suffered greatly. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? I read in the New York Times where the president of Mexico is demanding that Spain apologize for Cortez.
Oh my God!
That the Western peoples came here, and they did. They imposed their religion, they imposed their language, their culture, and they created, certainly in the United States, the greatest success in the history of the world, almost for the last 200 years, certainly. And was this a good thing? Were they justified in doing this, or was that wrong? Was that imperialism, colonialism, racism? White supremacism and all the rest of it. So again, there's a fundamental disagreement over whether we come from a civilization that has not sinned so much and so deeply and broadly that it deserves exactly what's happening to it, and it ought to be displaced.
This is what Kamala Harris, running for president, senator from California, said last week on The Daily Show.
We need to have border security. All nations do. All nations define their borders. But we should not have a policy and a perspective that is grounded in keeping people out for the sake of this nationalistic kind of thing that this president is trying to push. We should have borders that also allow people to come in. That is part of the strength of our nation.
We give 1.3 million green cards, which I think is way too many. Every year in the United States. Most Americans polled think it's either keep it the same or lower the number.
And 90% of these are folks coming from what you might call the second or the third world. And people are fundamentally basically good, but there's no doubt there's a greater difficulty in assimilating people from different civilizations and cultures and ethnicities and races in the United States than other folks. And we know this is true. African Americans have been here since 1619. They've helped build and create the nation. They're part of its culture and history. And yet we haven't fully assimilated African American citizens. At the same time, we're bringing in millions and millions of people. We're conducting an experiment, which, to me, I'm a pessimist. It's not working, it seems to me. But Ms. Harris, what does she say? I mean, she's virtually in the first part of that comment she made, she's calling for open borders. That's the end of countries. I mean, the United States becomes a giant mall of America.
Well, here's what we know for sure. We know that at this clip, America as we know her today will be completely transformed. Which is, I think, their goal.
The Republican Party will be finished.
Yeah, the Republican Party will be done. So most of Central America will have moved to the United States. And Mexico, people will just come and go, but although it's easier to deport people to Mexico. But once you have that critical mass in the country, and with this birthright citizenship thing, which also Trump said he was going to deal with, then you're off to the races. And I don't think that, and when I say races, I mean like running races or horse races. I don't see how that is going to end up with more freedom, more peace, and more prosperity. And more, I don't. I think that's what I'm concerned about. Forget the English language.
It's not going to be more freedom because you're going to need far more laws to make sure everybody's treated equitably. And we're now talking about a society where there's got to be equality of results in terms of the benefits and income and welfare. And that takes, to create that kind of society, socialist, takes an enormously large and powerful government to do that. That's going to have to grow and grow and grow. But the point is, all these folks look at the Democratic Party. They're going to lower the voting age to 16. They're going to give voting rights to illegal aliens. And all the felons in the United States, of which there are millions and millions, are going to be allowed to vote. And the whole idea is to swamp the Republican Party. I don't know what Florida was doing. I see DeSantis is fighting it now. But they had Amendment 4, which I think basically gave voting rights to 1.5 million felons, folks who had been in prison. And Florida's a state that it's a total swing state. It's hanging chads decide elections down there. So so you bring all these folks in, and Florida's going to go, and Texas is going to go, I think. And it may be a bit of time because the folks who are migrants and immigrants, it takes years for them to become citizens or their kids to grow up who are citizens and vote. But there ain't no doubt which way this thing is going.
1.5 million illegal aliens will be added to population this year. I just want to say that again.
McAuliffe added 150,000 out here in Virginia alone. He called it the most progressive act he committed or perpetrated as governor of Virginia. Up here in Northern Virginia.
I don't. Northern Virginia is. Yeah, I moved here in 1987, or 1986, and Northern Virginia is completely changed. I mean, it is a completely changed place. Washington Post did a big piece on it.
I grew up in D.C., and we used to go across the river to play WNL. Of course, WNL's had its name changed. But it's not Washington and Lee. I think it's Washington and Liberty now or something. But this was, deeply Protestant Southern country. And Catholic schools coming over there. I can still remember some of the brawls in those stadiums at night and stuff that they had during games, but it was part of the South.
Well, how did the Buchanan boys do in those brawls, Patty?
I was at fifth grade. I was observing, I'll tell you.
That's like, I've got to go back to Plato and Socrates now. I'll get back to you on that. Well, I think, again, what can be done? I mean, you had Republicans in majority for the first 2 years. They decided to do the tax cut, and what else did they do? They did the tax cut and the tax cut. And the tax cut. No, they did something else that didn't work.
Well,
they did.
They tried to roll back Obamacare.
I do think what's going to happen here is that there's going to be a growing realization on the part of more and more folks. And I think, frankly, that Border Patrol fellow, that story in the New York Times that they led with, the same day their editorial was saying, migration is down, when he said there were 76,000 or so came in February, that was jolting. And the new statements he's making and the new numbers are jolting. And I think the issue is going to come back, and it's going to come to the point where the American people are going to be asked, do you want really wide open? I mean, what we got down there can't control it. That's not me. That's the fellow on the border saying that. And if they can't control it, it basically is de facto open borders. And you got an excellent chance of getting in if you come to the border. And the American people are going to face a decision as to whether they want to preserve the nation they've got or whether everybody comes in. And that's, and the world remakes America.
That phraseology is exactly right. America's not determining her own destiny, not the American people. They didn't vote for this.
The world is coming. The world is deciding.
And I think you're right, Pat. At the very core of this is a deep self-loathing on the left. On the right, it's pure greed. It's pure greed, Chamber of Commerce greed. But on the left, it's remaking America.
And it's a loss, basically, if you will. A loss of, in the country, I was in a restaurant the other day, and this guy somehow recognized me, just grabbed my arm and said, this is not America, this isn't the country, I grew up in. And there's a deep patriotic feeling among a tremendous number. It's what elected Trump. And so I think this idea of the country, of sort of losing the country you grew up in, which was a great and good country. Sure, it's got its sins in the past and its flaws, but it was the greatest force, I think, for good in the world, despite its problems, in the last 200 years or 250 years. And people still love it and want to maintain it, and I think they see it slipping away, and they're not mistaken.
Here is the president speaking about why this is all important. When his big UN speech, and again, everybody was hopeful that we'd see real action here. This is what his UN speech, I think it was last year? No, it was in September. Let's listen.
In America, we believe in the majesty of freedom and the dignity of the individual. We believe in self-government and the rule of law. And we prize the culture that sustains our liberty, a culture built on strong families, deep faith, and fierce independence. We must defend the foundations that make it all possible. Sovereign and independent nations are the only vehicle where freedom has ever survived.
On rabid nationalism and xenophobia and doctrines of tribal, racial, or religious superiority as their main organizing principle, the thing that holds people together, eventually those countries find themselves consumed by civil war or external war. Check the history books.
Okay, let's check the history books on that. That was Obama responding to the belief in nationalism, Pat.
Yeah, well, look, what is he talking about here? Let's talk about civilization. Which civilization was it that recognized the inherent dignity of the individual, the God-given rights to to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What civilization, what countries built their societies and their nations on these principles, failing, of course, at times. But, I mean, where did it come from? And it was a civilization that we come from, the Western civilization, built on all these ideas and these principles and the histories, again, flawed as they were, what we created. If it's not superior, I mean, why do we want to export it to the world? That even the democracy uber alles crowd, where do all these ideas, where do they come from? And so, I mean, does Barack Obama think the Kenya of his father was a superior country to the United States, or are they both equal? And why are the people coming here from all over the world? Some of them coming to work, some of them coming for the benefits, some of them coming to be free, some of them coming to be Americans, all these things. What civilization created this? And so I think the people aren't addressing this question because we've got something here which has a certain measure of fragility to it, which can be lost.
Yeah, so while it's fun that the president tweets about like Morning Joe's ratings, it's really not that's really not relevant to the current crisis facing the country. I will say the reason Trump is president is because people sensed in him sort of the same gut patriotism and sort of rooted exasperation and anger at what was happening to his country as they feel. Yep.
I think that really is a real force of identity. And one thing that Trump has done, I'll give him credit for. First, he's taken the worst beating of any president I've ever seen, and I think he's right when he says few others could take it. But he does fight back, and he does fight, and he does recognize who the real ultimate adversary is of the America he grew up in.
I think that the government, when it comes to this border issue, does not have the consent of the governed. This is not what the people want by any stretch of the imagination.
You've got a very, Laura, what we ought to do is, if you had it, and I think they're pretty good ideas, is national referenda. If you had a referenda saying, how many immigrants do you want do you want the border secured and all illegal immigration halted, or should we accept the fact that they're going to be coming in? Or second, how many immigrants do you want into the United States legal every year? You want 0? You want 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million? Mm-hmm. Your call. Let Americans decide whom we're going to adopt, how many we're going to bring in, folks, and from where. But the point is, those who say, look, people who can assimilate much easier come from our similar civilization, the Western civilization. We're obviously more concerned about that, about what happens in Lithuania and Estonia than we are in Rwanda and Burundi and places like that. People say that, that's racist and stuff, but that's part of the civilization we come from. And do you want folks from our civilization, or do you want folks from other civilization, or does it matter? These are huge, huge questions.
And you're seeing what the elites do with referenda. When they called the Brexit vote, and I'm going to talk about this issue with Nigel Farage coming up, but they took the Brexit vote in June of 2016, and look at what they're doing now over in the UK. They cannot untangle.
That's very interesting, because when Brexit happens, the vote for Brexit was basically England, ex-London. London voted to remain, and Wales. Northern Ireland voted against Brexit, and Scotland voted against Brexit. I think if Brexit goes through, I can see Scotland having another referendum on leaving London, basically, and staying in the EU. Northern Ireland's going to have a tough decision, because you got the Catholic Irish in the south who look south, and you got the Protestant, the Ulster folks, who look elsewhere, who look toward England. And I think you could have real tensions and pressures building to split Great Britain up to into its component parts democratically.
Well, and again,
These are the big issues. These are the issues of our time.
These are, I mean, this Brexit thing. Yeah, I mean,
it's we don't. Stormy Daniels, important that is.
Yeah, Michael Avenatti. It's fun to gloat on that, but are we going to? Is Western civilization, as we understood it, actually hanging in the balance? I think you could actually make a very strong argument that it is tipping over the cliff.
It is not only that; it's looking at demographic death.
And I mentioned this a while ago after reading in
There's a good piece, Laura. It's a good piece in the New York Times today, on top of the one where the president of Mexico sent a letter to Madrid and the Pope demanding apologies for Cortez, 500 years ago in 1519. But there's another one on top of that that's I just lost the thought of that. It was there's another story in there that goes right to the issue.
Yeah, well, again, when you speak truth about issues like this,
it's about Italy. Population in Italy
declining.
Italy is basically, its population is aging, shrinking, and dying. And there's a World Congress of Families is meeting in Verona. I mean, two gentlemen of Verona, the Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet, and they're talking about the birth dearth in Europe. Now, if these things, and I wrote about this in Death of the West, and there wasn't a single country in all of Europe except for Iceland, which was about 2.1 birth per woman, not a single one that had a birth rate that would enable it to endure in its present form to the end of this century. And so I think you're seeing in Europe, the growth of the Muslim population. It's slow and gradual, but it's really growing. And I think folks are diminishing and dying out in Europe, who are the native born and who are also the indigenous peoples.
Yeah, well, yeah, and again, when you discuss this, like the idea of homeland, I mean, we have a whole department that Bush started after 9/11 called Homeland Security. I think that's a good idea for me to expound on Fox one night. But what does that mean? Yeah. Can you even say homeland?
So in the Times, it's very good. It's very good on Italy. Salvini has got one view, and his partner in the 5-star movement.
Yeah, the 5 stars.
He's on the left, and they got another view, But the Salvini, this fellow he's a Lega Nord guy, and he's in the government now as the interior guy, and they're growing stronger and stronger, while the weaker partner in the 5-star movement, it was started by a comedian. Europe is a very interesting place.
Well, yeah, and they're going after, what happens is, like, when the people see their country slipping away, their livelihood flatlining, wages flatlining, globalization changing their way of life for the worse. The elites think the middle class is just going to sit back and say, "Okay, take it all from me," and that's not how they react. So in Hungary, when they elected, what is this? Or is that Orban, right?
Orban.
And now they're blasting him. Oh, another white nationalist in Hungary. That's all they can say is white nationalist. That's all they can say.
Yeah, what do you mean? But basically, it's not. This gets me, this term white nationalism, because Orban can fairly be called a Hungarian nationalist, just as the fellow in Warsaw is a Polish nationalism.
Right.
But let Poland be Poland was a motto that in the early Reagan years we were cheering Gdansk, the solidarity in Gdansk on, saying let Poland be Poland. That was the origin, incidentally, of the let Reagan be Reagan slogan. But this is what nations are. Nations are the political expressions and state expressions of peoples who have come together as one and who have risen or grown and developed and grown together into one separate and identifiable people. In America, of course, is different than those. Those kinds of nations. But we originally were very British, Northwest Europe, English, etc. I remember in writing one of my books, they didn't let any Catholics in Virginia. They put the priests back on the boat.
Oh my! And literally, you know what they're saying? This is
The
what they're
Indians
saying.
were okay, but the priests were not.
Oh no! Yeah, well, might be a good idea now.
They
Pat,
put the wrong one on the boat.
yeah, I put them on a boat and sent them off a long pier. Some of them, certain ones. Hey, Pat, you know what they're doing to that, or just on what they do to people who want to preserve their country? Again, back to the idea of homeland. This is what that Vox, that liberal website Vox, they have a big piece on, and similar ones have been published in the New York Times. The piece is called "It Happened There: How Democracy Died in Hungary. A New Kind of Authoritarianism is Taking Root in Europe. And there are warning signs for America." And they have this big graphic. And of course, in the graphic, you have the map of Eastern Europe. And everybody who remembers their geography, you remember that Hungary is to the north of Serbia and Croatia, and to the west of Romania and south of Slovakia. Austria is to its east. So it's centered right in the middle. Well, they were just about done with the crush of refugee humanity that was crossing their southern border. They're
right.
planning to build a fence along their eastern border with Romania, which is where a lot of the refugees have also crossed. And because he wants to actually have a country, he's called an autocrat, and he's destroying democracy. This is how fanatical. I'm calling the open borders people fanatics every day, if I can, on either the podcast or Fox. Fanatics.
But that makes a very good point. They are really they recoil at the idea of nations and peoples, individual separate peoples, and I think what they see basically is fundamentally utopian, that you can have a nation of all races, creeds, beliefs, religions, all these things, and that's what they're attempting to build in the United States. But the problem is, if you take a look, you mentioned the Northern Balkans there, but look at what happened to Yugoslavia. As soon as communism, they lifted Tito's communism off of there you got Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia broke away, and Montenegro, and Macedonia, and Bosnia, and Kosovo eventually. They broke apart based on lines of religion and tribe and history and all of these things. That's what took the Soviet Union apart into 15 countries, and then started taking many of those countries, Ukraine, for example. They were Russified in the East and Russified in Crimea, and they split along the lines of cultural tradition, ancient ties, all of these things. What bothers me about and of course, many elites now, what they're doing is they're arguing for something that seems to be just an idea that's, of all this, multi-culti stuff here in the United States, which the world is rebelling against. Not always correctly in some cases, in my judgment. What they're doing to the Uyghurs is appalling in China.
Yeah, awful.
But the idea, it seems to me, the solution to, or at least one solution, is to really recognize the pulls and tugs of these ancient beliefs, which can be described as tribal or nationalistic, and the idea of federalism and things like that, to deal with them without people going to war over them.
Well, I think that what we find, Pat, again, is we can assimilate people if we love our country. If we love our country, people from different backgrounds can come, but they have to. Part of citizenship has to mean that you love the country as much as we do. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything they do.
What is how do you define the country?
Yeah.
Does the country, are we an English-speaking people?
Right.
Are we
exactly.
a country that appreciates and honors American history, or is it history good or bad? Or our heroes, should Columbus with the discovery of the New World, Columbus and the missionaries, and frankly they came out of Mexico or what is now Mexico, to build those, San Juan Capistrano, San Francisco. All of these were originally Catholic missions and things. And you got the Father Junipero Serra, all the other names of the folks, their statues and things are being torn down, because the idea is, and it's what I started when I was talking about should the West apologize to the world?
Well, we certainly spent a lot of money to protect the world, didn't we? And now we're we spent all this money on all these weapons and all these wars, and we just open our borders to people who, again, most of them just want to come here to work. I get that, but not everybody, and it's just that's not a country.
Again, but your point about being one country. You mean anybody can be a good American? There's no doubt about it. But what defines an American, and what defines it's more than simply raising your hand and saying, I'm a citizen of the United States. In my view, because that's the legal and political definition of becoming an American. But we have a culture, we have traditions, we have history, we got heroes, we have a language, and frankly, and now, can you contain all these multitudes and still be one country? That's the great question of our time.
And then the idea of unity collapses because resentments build, and then that's what we're really worried about.
Sure. What do you unite around?
Diversity, Pat, because our greatest strength is diversity. One nation under diversity with liberty and justice for all.
We've got lots of diversity up here in Northern Virginia.
Oh my, yeah, exactly. All right, Pat, it is always my pleasure to talk to you. It makes me smarter, and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Okay.